Welcome to the Wish I'd Known Then podcast, where we focus on how authors found success, looking at strategies that have taken them to the top of the bestseller charts, as well as what they've learned from their mistakes. Because being an indie author is more than knowing the latest marketing trend. It's about being innovative and creative and learning from your mistakes.
Welcome to the Wish I'd Known Then podcast. I'm Sara Rosette.
And I'm Jami Albright. And this week on the show we have
Orna Ross.
Yes, we do. And it is a great interview, so informative. And I just love talking to Orna. She's such, she has so much experience and she's so smart. And I really enjoyed it.
Yes. While we were doing this interview, I thought she's really wise. She's been doing it for a while, and she has some really good insights into just the different aspects of working as a self-publishing writer.
Yes.
Like we talked about, 3 different kinds of marketing. She's really good at breaking things down and identifying, well, it breaks down into these 3 parts. And once you can see it, you're like, oh, of course. But sometimes it takes somebody else to see it and tell us. And then we go, oh, that's right. So there's lots of good stuff in this interview.
Yes.
I think my favorite thing we talked about, she writes in multiple genres. And I think her favorite comment of mine was when I asked her, if she had any tips for that. And her tip was 1 book at a time. Like, oh, yeah, that makes sense.
That makes total sense. Thanks, Orna. Yeah.
And it's so simple, but a lot of times we just don't do it. So I thought it was funny.
Yeah. So what's been going on with you?
Well, this week we had one of our kids graduated, and
yay!
Yes, it was very exciting. She graduated with an advanced degree, but I decided a while back that I wouldn't share things about my kids online unless they shared them. If they wanted to share them and put it out there, cool. So all I'm going to say is that she got an advanced degree, and we were so, so proud of her. And it was a lot of fun, a lot of hard work. And so that was like most of my week. I went to the graduation and we celebrated. We ate way too much food and had a humongous slice of chocolate cake last night that was like, and it took about 7 people, but we put a pretty good dent in it. And other than that, I've just been working on editing my manuscript, and it's going okay. I'm kind of feeling all right about it, in the trenches with that. And once I get to the end, I'll feel better. So
yeah, it's true.
Yeah. What about you? What have you been doing?
Well, I'm home, but I guess I want to tell people that my sister is doing fine. She is feeling all right, and we're just waiting now for another MRI. And I got my second booster because I do have a health issue that required, or not required, but it would be smarter for me to get the booster. And I didn't have a reaction with any of the other COVID shots. And this one laid me low. I was very sick for about a day. Not the day I got it, the next day. And but I'm fine now. And I have started a kind of a secret project this week. And I'm saying secret because if it never happens, then it can always be secret. But
there's a lot of I don't know, it feels better sometimes to know it's totally anonymous. Yeah.
I'm not telling anybody. But so I feel good about it and gotten some work done on it. So that's what I've been doing. And we should probably get on with the interview because Orna is wise and has great things to say.
Yes, let's do it. So here's Orna. Well, today we are really excited to talk with Orna Ross. Hi, Orna. How are you?
Hi, Sara. I'm very well. Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
We're so glad you're here. I was just saying before we went live that we both admire Orna, and so we're very excited that she's here.
We are. So let me read your bio, and then we'll jump into the questions. Orna Ross is a best-selling and award-winning independent author and poet. She writes and publishes literary fiction, family murder mysteries, and inspirational poetry. Orna is also director of the Alliance of Independent Authors, work for which the Bookseller magazine has named her one of the 100 most influential people in publishing. She writes publishing guides for other authors and poets as Orna A. Ross.
Very good. So, Orna, tell us how you got into writing.
So I think I always wanted to be a writer, but I wasn't able to admit that to myself when I was younger. I grew up I grew up in Ireland where writers were, at a time where writers were all dead white males. W.B. Yeats, George Bernard Shaw, Oscar Wilde, really impressive Nobel winning writers, and girls just weren't encouraged to write at all at that time. It's so changed now, but back in the distant past. So I thought I'd be a teacher. I would teach English literature, and that's what I went to college to study. And of course, I wasn't a great student because I was off reading books that weren't on the curriculum and blah, blah, blah. So when I came out, I did lots of different kinds of jobs. I didn't settle into teaching. I loved teaching English lit, but I didn't love the convent schools, which were kind of typical in Ireland at that time as well. So I did lots of different work, but then at one point I thought, what I really want to do is be a writer. So in my mid-20s, I started writing articles for newspapers and magazines, and I freelanced like that for a long time. But always in the back of my mind, I wanted to write a novel. And so I began that in my 30s. And it was the death of a close friend then that turned me into a poet. I had written poetry, as many people do in their teens, but I had kind of stopped. But when a close friend died, I found myself turning to poetry, and I've been writing poetry as well ever since. So I do what I don't recommend other authors to do, which is I write across the three macro genre of fiction, non-fiction, and poetry, which is almost crazy.
Do as I say, not as I do. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That seems to be the story of my life, actually. That's what my children say anyway.
Well, we're gonna come back to poetry and kind of juggling all these different genres. But we always like to ask everyone, what is your definition of success?
Yeah, I have a few, I suppose, but I mean, definitely when it comes to work, the fact I live my definition of success in a way, in that being able to do this, being able to create what I love and love what I create and make a living from that. I think that's just an enormous privilege. So that's a definition of success. I also, it's part of my definition of success is facilitating others to do the same. I get a huge kick from that, and it wouldn't be the same for me to just do it for me.
Right.
Being part of a community and enabling and empowering others is something that I love to do, and learn from others as well, obviously, as well. And I see, so that's part of my definition. And I also see myself as part of a great creative movement that's happening in our time. And I actually think the human race is expanding and through all this creative activity, which is, unparalleled in the human race up to now. So that also, I feel, being part of that is part of how I define success.
No, I think that's lovely. I wrote down, create what I love what I create. And then make a living from it. So that is awesome. And so this creative movement, where do you think it came from? Why do you think now as opposed to before?
Yeah, I suppose it depends on how you look at it, and how I look at it is I see, we live in an expanding universe, and I think that the human race, we take steps forward and backwards, much like when you're writing a book. It's not all a linear progression across the ages, that we're getting better and better. But I do think we are expanding, and our mental, emotional, and psychological capacity, is larger now as human beings. So I think, it is the next logical stage. I think when you have satisfied certain needs, psychologically and emotionally, you do move on to the creative, and you want to create, and you want to be part of that. So I think it's something that, I just see it as part of the development, if you like, of human evolution.
Oh, okay, that's great. So speaking of that, what do you wish you'd known about writing and craft when you started?
Yeah, it's so interesting. I mean, there's so many things, and people tell you, don't they? They tell you all these things, but you have to actually go through it and make your own mistakes and fail and not get it particularly right in order to do it. So one of the things for me would be definitely brevity. So it took me a long time to learn to write short, and I actually credit poetry for that. So it takes me a long time to write a novel, and one of the reasons is I write way too much, and then I have to cut, and I am getting better at that. But I don't think if somebody had said to me at the beginning, don't do that, I don't think I would ever have written anything. So in a way, I find that writing advice, while it can give you a shortcut, very often it actually doesn't, and it's afterwards when you've worked your way through it that you look back and you say, oh, I wish there had been a shortcut here, but actually there wasn't. You had to do the work.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, that's very interesting that you write long in your novels, but you also write poetry. So that is an interesting mix. Do you enjoy switching between the two?
Yes, I do. In fact, I need to, when I've been writing one or the other for a while, I need to rest that part and then work on the other. And it seems like they really sustain each other. So since I've started writing poetry, fiction has come easier. I don't have to. But I think also the longer you do it, the easier it gets, like anything. It never becomes completely easy. And I, like everybody else, I have, hit that brick wall blank page every so often. But keeping busy is the other thing for me. If I fit writing in around other things, it flows better. If I have all day to write, nothing happens.
I think we've all been there.
Yeah, I think I am the same way.
Yeah. Well, that is interesting too, to think that we always talk about the advantage of being like staying in your lane and doing the same thing and not writing in other genres. But there is an advantage to writing multiple things because you're able to take a break and do something else and then come back, which is a nice kind of ebb and flow kind of pattern that many people don't have.
Yeah, I think it depends on whether you're looking at it as a publisher or as a writer. And of course, as an indie author, you have to look at it through both lenses. Definitely as a publisher, I would have to say I wouldn't choose this way of writing across the genre. But as a writer, I would have to say I love this way.
Yes.
So it's about balancing those two things out, I guess. And as long as the books are selling, but it does mean that you have to do everything over and over again. So, it's a very different branding exercise for the fiction and poetry. Some readers know me just as a poet. Some know me as a novelist. Some know me just as the author of the writing guides kind of thing. So, and there's actually not a lot of crossover between those. There is some, but not a lot. So each time the branding is quite different for each, and you've got to have different kinds of newsletters and different kinds. So the work doubles and triples up, as a result of it. But it's doable. And I think I learned a lot that was very useful in terms of the day job, which is how I think of my work for Ally, the Alliance of Independent Authors, because I think I can speak across a range of genre, which, if I just had stayed in one lane, I wouldn't be able to do, because it is quite different. It's not so dissimilar, promoting fiction and non-fiction, but poetry is different, and it's good for me. It's good for me to know about that, in terms of speaking to poets.
Well, speaking of marketing, is there anything you wish you had known about marketing?
Yeah.
We're all there with you.
How long do you have?
Yeah. I mean, I was not a natural marketer at all. I had to learn everything the hard way. And my best advice for marketing is I kind of came to realize very late in the day that there are really three kinds of book marketing, I think. One is the what I call access marketing, which is about developing that relationship with the reader and attracting them into your newsletter or, whatever your funnel is, whatever way you do that. So that kind of attractor marketing. One is influencer marketing, reaching out through bookstores or librarians or book reviewers, bloggers or whatever, but influencers are your target. And then the third is algorithm marketing, which is about trying to send the book up the charts and get the algorithms to work for you. I got all of those all mixed up. So I was just running around, in a bit of a tizzy for a long time until I settled and understood exactly where I position myself. And the other thing that I think I wish I had the confidence to do that I learned by mistakes is to understand that the passion that fires the books must also fire the marketing, and to bring those as closely together as possible. So I used to kind of don the marketer hat and become almost like a different person. But the more I kind of brought the two together, so the same sort of language that is in the books, the same sort of imagery and connection, that you're putting it from the same place, it made it far more enjoyable and creative for me, for starters. But it also works. The reader picks up something in that, whereas when I think because I didn't have confidence in myself as a marketer, I was too markety in a way at the start. And now I just have the confidence to not need to do that. Yes. So yeah, they're the two things I wish I'd known, the different kinds of marketing, and also the thinking of them as two, here's the writer over here and here's the marketer over there, is not a useful way to think about it. Bringing both of those as close together as you possibly can, being really creative with your marketing, enjoying it as much as you enjoy writing your books. I think that certainly has been the secret for me, and it's a secret I've now gone on to share with lots of other authors, and I've seen it make a difference for people. So I do think that's pretty key and pretty central for most people, actually.
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, that almost falls under branding in a way, but that's one of the reasons I like TikTok, because I can be Jami Albright, who writes small town Texas rom-coms on there, and it's not a persona, it's me, but a lot of the things I do on there are very are the same way they are in my books. The language I use, the way I speak and the stuff, and I think that is what's so fun about it to me, as opposed to some other marketing that I do. So yeah, I get that. I hadn't thought of it that way before, but that's a very good way to think about it.
Yes, and you're reminding me, I mean, it is branding. It absolutely is. And it's a heightened kind of version of yourself, isn't it? That's in the books already and then goes into the marketing. The other thing you've reminded me of there that I wish I had known earlier was that marketing is not promotion. Promotion and marketing are actually two completely different things, So obviously the branding and the author platform bit falls into the marketing, the kind of ongoing development of that and that voice, if you like. But promotion is short, sharp and time bound and is quite a different thing. I used to get them all mixed up as well. So until I got clear about those things, it was hard work, whereas now it's a lot more fun. Hats off to you for doing TikTok, by the way. I don't think I could bear to take on no social media.
My children wish I didn't. My grown children wish I didn't do it because it's embarrassing for them. But I love it. It's really fun. So what assumptions did you make at the beginning of your writing career? And looking back, did they turn out to be right or wrong?
Yeah, I mean, my writing life falls into two distinct halves, if you like, because I came before, I was writing and publishing before self-publishing was the thing. Right. So my first two novels were trade published, and I had that whole thing. So before I in inverted commas, got published, as we used to think about it in those days. I thought getting published was the end of the journey. I just thought once I got my contract, I got a very nice contract at the beginning. I mean, after 54 actually rejections, it was number 55 when I got what I thought of as a kind of winning the literary lottery, the golden ticket. All I would have to do now is go home and write books and everything was going to be wonderful. And of course it wasn't at all. And in those days, there was very little talk. I mean, authors talk so much to each other now. We've got wonderful communication systems, but back then you didn't, and most authors were afraid to speak out about their publisher or their agent. So there was a lot of smoke and mirrors, and I had a lot of assumptions which were illusions, which were shattered in the experience of actually going through the experience of being trade published, because we had a lot of creative differences. I had a very different vision for my books than my publisher had. I was shocked and outraged that I wasn't going to get any input into the marketing end of things. I hated my covers, so we had a lot of issues. Along came self-publishing. I didn't think it would be for me. I tried it instantly. I saw, oh gosh, this changes everything. The fact that you can keep your rights and still be out there. I knew, because I had worked as a literary agent briefly, and I knew the value of that straight away. So, I got myself, I mean, I don't think of myself as a technical person. I'm not at all, but I learned what I needed to know in order to produce a book. And then I learned a lot as I went along. And I suppose the biggest assumption I made was that I was still a writer who was kind of somehow publishing, and somewhere along the line, pretty early on, the penny dropped. You don't have a writing career anymore. You run a publishing business now, and that was a big penny drop for me. And when I realized that, and I realized that I am actually a publisher, and I need to be a better publisher. I need to understand marketing and promotion better. Publishing is not production. That's one important part of it. The editing, the design, and the putting the book together, that is one half of publishing. But the other half is the rights, licensing, and the marketing and promotion. And being a good publisher means being good at those 7 different, quite different processes. But once you get them, they take a little while to get, but once you get them, then they can be applied to every book. So yeah, that distinction between having a career and being in business, that's the biggest kind of eye opener for me.
Yes. Yeah. You're very good at looking at things and parsing out the different parts of it and naming things. And that, I think that's wonderful, since you're, so work with so many authors, because it does help give a really clear view of what's going on. I think that's a great skill to have that a lot of us don't have, because we're so into our daily word count. We must get the words done.
Yes. We can't see the forest for the trees, as my grandmother would say.
Yeah, it's something I like doing. I like understanding processes and how they fall together. I'm very interested in the creative process as well, how it works, and then how it works within writing and how it works within publishing, and, where they feed each other and then where they need to be. I'm just interested in that, in how things work. I kind of like taking it apart and understanding it. It helps me to know what I'm doing.
Yeah. Well, we've given a lot of good examples and advice on things to look out for and watch out for. But we always like to ask, have you ever made a mistake that turned out to be a good thing? Partly because, we like to focus on lessons learned. Do you have anything else that comes to mind with that?
Yeah, I would say that every mistake is, so that's my attitude. I always view mistakes as a learning kind of opportunity. And so this happens to me all the time. Every day I make a small mistake. and
I understand that feeling.
Yeah.
Some days one kind of mistake after another. But I often find that the mistakes I make are perceptual. So I think that's where some of the things that I've spoken about already, they have come out of me realizing this isn't going well for you because you're looking at it the wrong way,
Right.
so kind of take a step back and see why. So, for example, that distinction between marketing and promotion came to me because I kind of was throwing money at the problem at one stage, and thinking if I just invest in this, sooner or later it's going to kind of take, and that really doesn't work. And I realized that because it does work for promotion, but it doesn't work for marketing, was what I kind of realized, for me anyway, my genre and my book. So that was a big kind of mistake that cost me a lot of money. But when I say a lot of money relative to what I had at that time, it's not a huge amount of money per se. But my point is the pain of that, in a sense, it sharpens your thinking. You have to look and see what's going wrong here. And very often I find that the mistakes I'm making, when I take a step back, and I have a technique I use called free writing, just everybody's familiar with, but I do it in a particular way. Free stands for fast, raw, exact, and easy. And I will take a step back if something's gone wrong, I've made a mistake or something, if somebody's mad at me, or, we've got something wrong, or whatever. I like to kind of wait until I'm not so emotional, take a step back, and then free write around it. And then from that, I can turn the mistake around and turn it into an opportunity. So I actively work at doing that.
Wow,
excellent advice.
Really fantastic. Yes, I'm feeling quite convicted at this moment. I'm going to need some time in my prayer closet to hash that out, because that is amazing advice. Yeah, I wrote it down because and I don't take a lot of notes during the podcast. That's Sarah's job because she's my podcast wife. And but I did write that down.
And meanwhile, my notes have all these little circles and stars on this side because, I've got to come back to this. This is good.
Yes. Oh, no, it's very good. Yeah. So you've talked about a few of your mindset shifts. Do you have any big mindset shifts besides the that you're a publisher, not just a writer kind of thing, that has changed during your career?
I think the concept, just speaking specifically about being a writer, I think this is a bigger shift, but it's kind of something that I went through. If you look back historically, writers defined themselves in different ways across the ages. So in, say, Shakespeare's time, you were a playwright, like there was a wheelwright and a cartwright. You were a maker. You were a maker. Right. You were a craftsperson. Then we got the Romantics, and we had the sort of the writer's artist and all of that. And then the 20th century, we had the writer as career. And maybe you're part of a university, or you're you need to kind of go through the influencers who can give you a job as a writer or whatever. And then it's the writer as entrepreneur. And that whole idea of the creative entrepreneur is very current and very now, and it suits me very well. But I used to think of myself as the artist. That was how I perceived of myself as an artist. And in more recent years, as I became a self-publisher and eventually became a reasonably good one, thinking of myself as an entrepreneur allowed me to bring in the art, but not be defined by the art. So that was quite exciting. It sort of felt like a boulder rolling off my back, to be honest. Yeah,
I can see that. Yeah.
It just became much more down to earth. And I think it does go back to that thing of having this English literature background. And as I said, growing up in Ireland with all these giants, and how people talked about writers almost in hushed tones, whereas, to be an entrepreneur is a very practical thing. It's very down to earth thing. My parents ran a business, and, it seems to me to be a much lighter thing to carry around. So I've enjoyed that mindset shift. Yeah.
That's a great answer.
Yeah. It's interesting that when most of us start out focused on the creative, And then eventually, if we stay with it long enough, we transition. I feel like I'm an accidental entrepreneur. Like I didn't have that in my plans, but I was like, oh yeah, I do have to learn how to do all this like sales tax and all this stuff that I didn't plan on. So
yeah, it's a lot sometimes, but I do agree with you. It's, to me, there's less pressure to be an entrepreneur than there is to be a master writer, sort of thing. And I see the difference there that you brought up.
Yeah. Well, we touched earlier on how you write across the different genres.
Yes.
So let's dive into that a little bit. So what advice would you have for someone who's trying to juggle maybe multiple genres, or I suppose it could also apply to the writing and the entrepreneurial side as well. What advice do you have for that?
Yeah. So again, learned painfully through mistakes. One book at a time. One book at a time. I was going to say if possible, but actually just scratch out if possible. Just do one book at a time.
Just limit it, huh?
Yeah. So you can write across the three genre if you must. If you don't have to, don't. Really, it might make sense if you love poetry, maybe to just keep that as a hobby. You don't necessarily have to publish everything you write. So it might just be a sustaining thing to you. But if you have to, and that's fine. You absolutely can, because I really believe that, if the want is there in us, and this applies across life in every aspect, if you've got the desire in you and it's there, you can't deny that. You must give it its head and follow that desire wherever it's going to take you. And it may take you to stopping, or it may take you places you can't even imagine. But if you really have the desire, follow it. But if you don't really, if it's just a little kind of itch, I think you would be better to stick to one, or certainly two genre if you can. But if you must, then, and you must write across the three, just stick to one. Know that, you do these three things, but that you concentrate on one book at a time, because it's very easy to get caught into the fantasy of the other book. The book we're working on is always the hard one, and the one we're thinking about in our head is always the easy one. And it's too easy to start swapping around. And I got myself into an awful mess, I have to say, where at one point I had so many projects open at the same time that I was spinning my wheels, really. And you forget as well, there, a project has a momentum. So in terms of, it's fine to finish a draft, put it aside, turn to something else, and then come back to it. But it must be a finished draft, not a patchy draft. So one book at a time, focus on that and stay with it. And one thing at a time is actually great advice for busy entrepreneurs. Just focusing on whatever it is happening in the next hour, and pushing everything else away is a good tip anyway, not to get distracted. I use the focus function on my computer all the time to turn things off and just sit with what I'm doing, so that keeping the focus on one thing, I think, is probably my biggest advice overall that applies across the board for writing and for publishing.
Yeah, that's excellent.
Yeah. I think it's hard to do, though. I mean, because it seems like there's a million things coming at us all the time. But you're a big advocate for planning. So tell us how you plan and why you recommend it for authors.
Yeah, I don't recommend it necessarily for every author, but I needed it. And this is kind of interesting because I recognize that other authors who are kind of more natural, good planners, good marketers, need to think about it less, in a way. But what happened to me was, because I was so busy, with Ally and my books and stuff, and not to mention life and all the other things we all have to do, I had to plan, because if I didn't, I was just scattered. I didn't feel, it's more about, I would get things done, but it was more about feeling like the to-do list was endless. The mountain of work was always there, and no matter what you did, you'd never got a sense of achievement or completion. And so that's what planning does for me. And that's what I feel is so important. That means that I enjoy every day, a few times a day, because I know what my plan was and I know I met it. And it doesn't matter that that's a small plan just for the next hour, or plan for the week, or plan for the month. I plan around quarters generally. I think 12 weeks is a great period, time period to achieve something significant. But then that gets broken down into monthly, and then into weekly, and then into daily, and then into what I'm doing next, which sounds very complicated, but actually isn't at all once you kind of get stuck in to do it. And the other aspect of planning for me that was very important was recognizing that as a writer, publisher, you wear three hats. You've got the producer, the maker, and you've got the promoter and the planner, which we were talking about. But you've also got this aspect that very often gets overlooked, which is the managerial, the processor, the person who looks after the creative process, but also the profits, and keeps the whole show on the road, really. And it can be very easy to overlook that aspect of the work and not give it the amount of time and attention it needs. And so kind of the planning system that I use focuses on the three hats that we must wear. And once I realized that was another kind of mistake or oversight, I wasn't paying enough attention to that aspect of the job. And when I did, that made, again, learned the hard way. When I did start paying attention to that, I came to see how very important it is and how often it is neglected. So yeah, that three hat system and the planning, it means that every day is a joy, that no matter, it doesn't matter that I'll never reach the top of the mountain of work. I won't. I'll go out with a list of things to do sitting beside me, I'm sure of it. But as long as I'm getting that feeling of accomplishment. So I work with a group of authors of similar mind who need the same sort of support and structure. And at the beginning of the week, we lay out our creative intent hats for the week, and then at the end of the week we note our accomplishments. And some weeks what you accomplish matches your intentions, but to be honest, most weeks it doesn't. You've either achieved something else, or haven't had a good week maybe, or whatever. Every week is different. But the planning allows me, just an endless to-do list didn't work for me at all. And this works much, much better. So just in terms of getting pure pleasure out of the work.
That's great. And just having intention, I think that's really a great way to think about it, because for me, it just seems like a big jumble. I've got my hands going around in circles, like this big jumbled list of things that need to be done. And I need to narrow that down. And when you do that, you do things with intention. And yes, it brings you joy and it brings you kind of fulfillment. Yeah. So I love that.
Absolutely. Being intentional is really core, isn't it, to being creative. You're direct. You don't get to drive the show, or you don't, you're doing it. It's a co-creation with all sorts of things, other people, but also your own internal landscape. And I have a sort of a faith in the creative spirit, which is very important to me in terms of, and that's why a creative intention is not the same as a goal. Where you smart goals don't work for me, because they're too linear. They assume too much that you're in the driving seat. I'm much better with creative intention, which is more open, more allowing, more exploratory and experimental. It just allows a more creative dimension to come in and kind of carry me along, and it works much better for me. And that the planning system that I use allows for that. So it isn't, I find a lot of the planning systems that are out there are really scary. They're just too, too linear.
They make me feel like crap a lot of times. I feel like crap about myself. I mean, it's like, gosh, I'm a big loser. So I love that you found something. Yeah. That's great.
Yeah. I remember a few years ago, I think it was when I started realizing all the admin stuff that had to be done, because when you start out, it's just write the books, and then you get some books out, and then you kind of add the marketing, and then you're like, okay, now I'm adding the marketing into the mix. And then you start going, oh, wait, I've got a catalog to manage now. And I remember thinking, there will always be more. No matter how many things I crossed off my to-do list, there's like a shadowy to-do list, that I never got to, or that was like coming up. So it's knowing that you can look at certain things and say, okay, I've accomplished this, and that's enough for this week or this day. That's a really good way to look at it, I think. So
absolutely. And in the planning system I use as well, we build in creative rest and creative play. So it's not just always about the work. It also budgeting time, to consciously rest. It really helps the work, and play as well. I think we can get too intense and too serious and find that the joy goes out of things. And that, the key to that is actually budgeting some time for play and taking a more playful attitude and just lightening up. It's only books.
We take everything so seriously, don't we?
Yeah. We really can.
Well, what are some simple steps if somebody wants to start planning more? What couple of pieces of advice would you give someone?
Yeah, so if for authors, I do think it's really useful. Start thinking about 3 hats. So if you have a to-do list, just categorize them. Is this a maker task? Is it a manager task? Or is it a marketer task? And just putting them under the 3 hats in itself, I think, can really help. And then balancing those 3. Realizing that you will always need to balance those 3 as an author publisher. And so you might balance it in a way whereby you do a bit of those every day, or you do a bit every week, or one week I'll focus on one, the next week I'll focus on the other, the next week. It doesn't matter what you do as long as you are balancing those up in the way that they need to. I think we all need to focus most of our time and attention on the maker. So if we don't write the words, and if we don't kind of put the books together, then we don't have anything to apply the other 2 hats to. But I think it's also, the managerial side of things where we're processing, where we're realizing what we need to do in order for our maker to be well and happy and productive. There are things that the manager needs to do. And in order for our marketer to go out there feeling strong and well connected to the maker, there are things that the manager needs to do. So just beginning to think about it in those. And then I think the other most useful thing is that idea of making conscious time for creative play and for creative rest, as well as the work. It sounds counterintuitive, and actually a lot of authors find this very hard to do at the beginning. But when you do it, it's amazing how resistance just melts away. So a lot of time very often is spent by authors, resisting, procrastinating, not wanting to do. And by consciously budgeting playtime and rest time, actually resistance often dissolves. So they will be the 2 main things, I think. But I think overall, it's back to what Jami was saying there about becoming intentional and understanding that creative intentions are expansive and are fluid, and not to be too rigid and not to be too hard on ourselves.
So it's been awesome having you here. What would you say is the best thing you've done to set yourself up for success?
Connecting with other indie authors, I have to say. Just the sustenance from the community, the understanding. I didn't know authors like me before,
Right.
And, people used to always talk about writers just want to write. And they want somebody else to do all the other stuff for them. But there's a whole load of authors who don't feel that way. I don't feel that way. And it was just so wonderful to meet the community.
Yeah. Yeah. When I finally found authors that were doing the same thing I was, it was like, oh, there are people out here that are like me. I found my tribe, which is a good feeling. Yeah.
Yeah. I was thinking before we got on about how we know you because of Joanna Penn, and we met Joanna Penn when we first I went to my first writers conference. It wasn't Sarah's, but we were there together. That's how I met Sara. That's how I met Joanna, and how things just go full circle. And it's so interesting, and I'm so grateful that I have those connections.
Me too. Absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, so before we go, I wanted to ask you about your workshops. Are those open in case anyone is interested? How would people sign up if they're open?
The planning workshops are for my patrons only. So I have, I have a limited number of people that I take on.
Okay.
And it's through Patreon.
Okay.
Yeah, because they're small group only, they have to be. So, but I am working on a planning book, which will obviously be available to everybody. And there are planners in place, which link in with my book, Creative Self-Publishing.
Okay.
So it's available broadly from that perspective, but the actual workshops are small group workshops through my Patreon.
Okay. Well, that is exciting. We will put a link to the Patreon and your Creative Self-Publishing. So
thank you very much.
Yeah. So where can people find out more about you and your writing?
Yeah. So my writing is at ornaross.com. And the Alliance of Independent Authors is at allianceindependentauthors.org because we're a nonprofit.
All right. Well, this has been terrific.
Awesome. Yes, Orna, thank you so much for taking the time. I know that you're struggling with a little bit of a scratchy throat, so we really appreciate you giving us all this great information and wisdom today. And thank you to Alexa Larberg for editing and producing the show.
And thank you guys for having me. I really enjoyed chatting to you, and thank you for the work.
You're welcome.
Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Wish I'd Known Then podcast. We hope this episode inspired you, empowered you, and made you laugh a little bit too. If you loved it, tell your friends about it. And if you feel so inclined, leave us a review. We look forward to being with you again next week.